Ladies and gentlemen, hello, and welcome back to the Be Unbound Podcast. This week is episode 61. We are continuing with our series called Unbound Pursuits, where we are having conversations with unbound students and alumni who are pursuing specific career fields. And Abe, for this episode, you got to have a conversation with some unbound alumni who have gotten into the EMS field.
Yes, this is a very interesting field. We have a couple unbounders who are first responders and work EMS. And this was a good conversation, David. We got to go into a lot of areas and subjects for EMS that I feel like is not as commonly talked about, or just things that those of us outside the field really should know and was really interesting to get to know more. But at the same time, yes, there were some really interesting and fun stories. So I would definitely encourage you guys to listen all the way to the end. There's some of the good stuff there.
Well, with all that being said, please enjoy the episode.
Hello, fam. Welcome back on to another episode of the Be Unbound Podcast. This is an episode of Unbound Pursuits, where we are talking with unbound professionals or people in different fields. Today, we have the EMS, the first responders in our community. And this is going to be an extremely fun episode. So I have three unbound EMS with me, Steven, Joel, and Roma. All good friends. We've shared lots of interesting, they've told me lots of interesting stories. And so I wanted to bring that on to share with the rest of you guys. Steven, let's start with you. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
My name is Steven Peterson. I currently live in Dallas, Texas, originally from Central Iowa, and worked in the EMS field up in Iowa for a while before moving down here.
Hey guys, I'm Joel Steers. I live in Augusta, Georgia. I've worked in EMS for a little over a year, and really excited to be here.
Hi guys, I'm Roma Detroit. I live out in Sheboygan County, Wisconsin. So if you can see the lake right behind me. I live in a little town called Lewisburg, Wisconsin, which is 10 miles south of Sheboygan. I've been in EMS for approximately about 5 years, and I work for a full-time paramedic service here in the county.
All right, so let's get right into how you guys got started. Is this a vocation or a career path that you guys always wanted to do and were pursuing this, through college already, or was this something where like, oh, I wanted to develop the skill later on? Steven, let's start with you again.
I didn't necessarily expect to get into EMS specifically, but I was looking at getting into some sort of emergency responder field, if not as a primary field, as a secondary field, because in Iowa, the way most EMS services are set up, about 90% of the EMS services there are volunteer-based. And so it's a lot of people working other jobs that are also in the emergency responder field. And I had started looking at going into either law enforcement or emergency medical services. And over a period of a couple of years and through some conversations with family members and things like that, ended up choosing to go the EMS route. We have 3 generations of EMTs in my family. A lot of experience there, a lot of interest there in helping people. And this happened to be a really good way to do that, especially in what can be some people's worst day of their life, and being able to kind of prepare yourself to be able to help other people in situations that they're not prepared to deal with was one of the big reasons I ended up in this field.
Yeah. I did not know that like 3 generations all did this. So that's really interesting.
So not my father, but my uncle, and then my grandfather. So
okay. And Roma, how about you?
So actually a little bit of a background. Our local EMS at the time, where we live in Lewisburg, had a local ambulance service that was actually started by my grandpa. And so kind of working through some of the stuff and growing up a little bit, I started getting a little bit interested. My initial focus was through law enforcement. But then starting looking at some things, I saw the opportunity and really the good decision in the regards to looking at EMS. And especially just besides the fact that you get that certification, it really gives you a lot of life skills. And part of that being that my grandpa, my grandma had been in it and my dad had been in it. And I thought it'd be kind of cool to continue the legacy per se. So that's kind of why I started in regards to that. So, yeah.
Gotcha. Okay. So also kind of a family thing. That's really cool. Again, I did not know that before. Joel, how about you? And I know I wanted to mention you last just because we've talked about the story, and part of it has to do with leadership courses and all that's pretty interesting. But yeah.
Hey, so I'd always kind of been interested in it. I had some not close family relationships with people, just general like family that had worked in the medical field, and hearing some of their stories, some friends and stuff in high school, like growing up. Even just talking to Roma and Steven like a couple of years before I went through EMT school. It was something that I knew that I wanted to do. I was very much on the fence about it. I had been through like an active shooter situation when I was in high school. Thankfully, like nobody was hurt, but there was like nobody around to like really help others. And it really got me thinking about like, what would I do if this happened again? And so that kind of also put me on their trajectory to want to just be like prepared for an emergency and like be able to take care of myself and others. I was very much on the fence about like going through a school and failing out, kind of risk averse in that. And like a lot of responsibility. Like if I mess this up, like somebody could actually die. Going through the leadership capstone in 2018 really helped like encourage me to buckle down, to set that goal and follow through with it. I wanted to do like humanitarian missions work, like on the long term. But I was making a lot of excuses and avoiding things that were daunting or that would like have a high risk of failure. So going through L3 challenged me to think about what kind of person I really wanted to be and encouraged me to foster this mindset, where I was less like risk adverse and like timid towards, taking those kind of steps towards following through. It helped me to foster that mindset. And so for me, going to EMT school was like the first tangible application for that.
Gotcha. And yeah, I had the blessing of going through L3 with you and traveling a little bit actually before, I think it was, before L3. We basically lived together for a month, and yeah, it was really cool to see that process happen. So I will second that. But on that note, for EMT school for you guys, like Joel, you started a little bit later, and then Steven and Roma, was that something that you guys started like fairly early on while you were still doing college, or what was that like?
I got to go backtrace a little bit. So I started at the time it was College Plus, way back many moons for those who know that and are so. I'm an old soul if you want to talk about it.
Almost ancient one at this point.
Yeah. So I initially started College Plus in, I believe it was the fall of 2012, if I remember right. And then we had one of the biggest first meetings in 2013. We had Snowmageddon in Texas. Where you were, Joel, you were Steven, were you guys there? I can't remember. Okay. That's a whole nother story in and of itself. No. Anyway, but then that next year, 2014, they had like the first CP3. I had kind of been starting to look at it because I had gotten some looking into public safety through a local police department. They did like an Explorer program. So it's a way to give high school age kids the opportunity to get kind of immersed in a very controlled atmosphere, what law enforcement looks like. And so I kind of call that kind of like my first love. And the fact that like I fell in love with that and I wanted to do that. And then when I started looking at some of those things, I saw that going into emergency medical field would also give me another level of expertise and experience to be better prepared for if I did continue to become a police officer. Then I started doing that while I was still in doing school with College Plus. So I remember when I was doing the courses, I was doing spring semester with them. And I remember I took Western Civ. I bombed something else. I can't remember what it was, but I was actually doing 2 different course loads at the same time, which I'm actually quite proud of. Like, I'm surprised. So,
okay, yeah.
So I don't know. Does that answer it?
Okay.
Sorry.
Yeah, no, for sure. Any other thoughts, gentlemen?
No, so I actually, as I could have said before, I was looking at going to law enforcement before, but a lot of those things weren't necessarily super. I wasn't necessarily looking at in terms of degree as much when I was going to that. I was more just concerned about getting a 4-year. And I didn't necessarily view my 4-year as a place to throw in a bunch of the emergency response skills and law enforcement training and stuff. That was kind of an extra thing in my head. Whether or not it should have been is a completely different question. But as it stood, they were in kind of two separate buckets, kind of like what Romo was talking about a little bit. And I was looking initially at going into the state patrol, and was looking at doing the EMT as a way to cross train and make myself, I guess, more useful. Because a lot of people in the state patrol, at least in Iowa, are cross trained as medical responders as well, and will work on local fire crews and things like that. So when I decided to actually go through that training, I was in the middle of my degree and doing my EMT training in the evenings at one of the local schools with a flight paramedic instructor, then going and doing all my clinical hours whenever I could fit them in. So it was a bit of a crazy schedule for a while, because I think at one point I was working 2 jobs and doing 2 different school programs. When I actually finished up my training, I had an internship completely unrelated to EMS in Texas, and then moved back. And when I moved back, I started working the EMS field, and then started the never-ending process of continuing ed after that. So that was kind of my journey, I guess. And then I was actually finishing my degree while working in the EMS field.
Gotcha. And Joel, what about you?
I actually went to EMT school. I guess it was over winter break between 2018 and 2019. I'd been tracking different EMS programs for a couple of years, and it just did not work out with other things that I was doing. Coming out of Capstone in 2018, I was like, okay, I'm going to do this. And found, I think it was a 13-week course, like December to February. And I didn't have any Thomas Edison classes going on at the time. And so I was like, all right, I'm just going to do this. It was at a local college. So applied, got in, and just studied for 13 weeks straight. And that was awful. I wouldn't recommend that. If you have the opportunity to go to EMT school, do like a semester course or something like that. Don't try to cram it into like a month and a half, 2 months.
You're a glutton for punishment, Joel.
Yeah. So I wasn't taking any other working on my degree. My degree's in communications, and I was wanting to do something, working with like nonprofits or humanitarian stuff, like as a journalist, like overseas. And it just seemed like a really good thing to have if I was going to be going overseas, like where people could potentially be getting hurt. So I kind of took some time off from my degree to focus on that and get the certification.
Let me just say that all of us being Unbound and going through the Unbound program, one, it definitely shows just I guess you can say the spirit, right? Everyone's working super hard, and a lot of times doing school and working multiple jobs, trying to figure things out. But yeah, it does sound like you were able to be flexible with figuring things out and pursuing EMT school. Yeah, just basically do that while figuring things out with college and all that. So, yeah.
The 13 weeks, though,
really
that is, wow. Oh, that's
insane.
Okay,
that's
one, though,
insane.
you did it, you didn't have any other classes, so that helps. But holy moly, guacamole. That's just ridiculous. I struggled.
Yeah.
Oh.
I was going to say, the last 2 weeks, I was studying 16-hour days. So I would literally sit down at my desk or go to the library, and for 16 hours, like from the time the library would open to the time the library would close, I would be sitting there studying. And the last half of the course, I was consistently behind on assignments and stuff. So wouldn't recommend it unless you have a really good background in it and all the anatomy and physiology and stuff. It was tough.
Well, and for those of you that are watching this that might be interested in doing this, when you're doing EMT school, you can't just factor in the book work. You have to factor in your clinical hours, and you have to factor in things like sleep. Because
things like sleep, yes.
Because the other thing with anything EMS is it's always going to take longer than what you think it is. Partially because the clinical hours that you're putting in may or may not be a fixed number of hours. You may have a number of contacts and things that you have to get. And so you may end up having to go a whole bunch of additional shifts just to get all of those requirements met. And it's a lot of report writing, and it's a lot of things like that. So definitely budget more time than what you think you will need. And also recognize the fact that if you actually want to learn the material really well and you actually want to do your clinical hours and get the most out of it, you want to do your clinical hours and then go back and recover the stuff that you've seen and the stuff that you learned to be able to kind of self-debrief somewhat after you've worked the incidents. So definitely budget more time than what you think you need, especially when choosing what specific course you're going to go through. Also, not all EMT programs are the same. So make sure that you're getting one from a school that's not just trying to churn out a bunch of people for money's sake, but that you're actually getting a really good training program.
And also the fact of don't necessarily follow a school that just wants you to pass, because passing is great, but does it necessarily make you a good EMT? So, and I can cover that a little bit later when we talk about like the idea of being in different positions of training and stuff and how you learn, you see how that kind of happens. But when you talk about clinical hours, Stephen, that reminds me of the whole sleep thing and clinicals. So we had choice of 2 different hospitals. So typically you'll have a choice of local hospitals that you have that will partner with the school. And then they will precept you, which is what they call. So someone babysits you in the ER to make sure you don't do anything stupid, because it happens and it's okay. But I ended up doing a 3rd shift clinical in the ER. And of course, I decided to pick the ER that was probably the deadest on a consistent basis. And we had 2 people there that night. And technically, we weren't allowed to share patients, but we kind of did. He was closer than I was. And so he got done. And I was like short, like 4 or 5 patients for different things. So I stayed all night, went home, slept for 3 hours, came back, finished it for the rest of the day, then went to class that night, slept for an hour and a half, and then bombed my hazardous material with everybody else in the class. So don't recommend that. Just saying, that was pretty rough.
You want to survive to the point of getting your job, not just...
Yeah.
It's not about passing, which is good.
We had a spot in the back of the room where people would stand in class. And I think our classes were like 4 hours on weeknights. And then we would be all Saturday, like all of Saturday. We did put in like 10 or 12 hours on Saturday. And literally like people would be falling asleep in class. And they would just be told to go like stand up in the back of the class or like pace in the back of the class to stay awake.
That's insane.
Well, going along with this line of thought, let's continue. What are some of these things that you wish you knew or you wish you did differently if you could go through this again? Basically speaking to those who are thinking about doing EMT school.
You will lose sleep. You will. And partially in class, if you learn that you're going to become sleep deprived, and depending on what kind of service you go into, in that case, it's not going to change much. So it kind of reacquaints or prepares your body for it, but you will lose sleep. And the fact of you're not going to come out of class and just boom, be ready to go. I mean, they always talk about that almost in any field. You have the book smarts and you have the street smarts. And so for me, I wasn't really a good book smart person. I can take the info in and I can understand it. But for me, I'm an applications guy. So I need to take the information that I'm bringing in and I need to know, okay, how does this apply to me when I'm working? So that was a pretty hard learning experience for me because I was so set in this is the way I was taught how to do this. And then to adapt how I did that in regards to the street and how things actually work. So don't be frustrated by that because I think a lot of people can be like, and I give a lot of credit to some of the training people that I had early on that really helped me through that and saw that, hey, you're struggling with this. It's okay. Try this and just let me kind of discover my own modus operandi, if you say, without being stupid and doing something that I shouldn't be doing. And then to really develop yourself into who you are as an EMT and a provider as a whole. So
kind of going along with that a little bit, and we joke about sleep deprivation stuff, and it is a really big issue. And it's something that is not just a schooling thing. It's a thing when you actually are working in the field, probably more so, just because you're working weird hours and depending on your service, they may be floating you back and forth between shifts and things like that. But one of the things that is really important is learning where to set limits. And I say this a little bit tongue in cheek because I was really bad at this. if you're getting into this field, you're getting into it for a reason. It's typically because you really love the field and you love working with people and you love helping people, which is great. All of those are great things. But one of the things that can very quickly become is kind of a drive to always give, even where it's not required necessarily, or where there's not necessarily, like, one of the things that I would do is I lived away quite a bit of ways from my station. And so it wasn't possible for me to just go out and respond to a call if there was extra help required or something like that. But I would actually keep my pager on at night just so I kind of knew what was going on before I got there. And in retrospect, that was probably not the best choice because I was losing a lot of sleep even when I wasn't in a position to actually help. And so learning where to kind of set those limits. And also, and this is a really tricky one because I'm not exactly sure what to tell you to do to deal with it, but learning how to find your baseline, because one of the things that can really happen in this specific field is it's not always like really obvious stress. There's a lot of cumulative stress that happens when you're in the field. And it's not necessarily like you got a really bad incident and you're having to debrief from that and you know where all that stress is coming from. And sometimes there is that. But there's a lot of wear and tear that just happens day to day. And if you don't have a way to kind of measure out where you're at physically, emotionally, spiritually, whatever that looks like, or you don't have people there that can tell you when you start to go sideways, it's really easy to end up off the rails and not realize it. And then when you are able to finally decompress, it's really easy to have a crash because you're not keeping up, and your body is essentially running on adrenaline for long extended periods of time. And so finding some ways for you to kind of debrief yourself and to figure out kind of where that baseline level is, so you know when you start to deviate, is really, really super important.
Yeah, totally. I mean, not a good comparison, but I'm just thinking of you're basically living on Apex Week, which is not healthy. Okay, we all love Apex for you, those of us who are Ascend and Unbound. But yeah, we are not supposed to live like that. But really good points, Joel.
Yeah, I mean, Steven had some really good points on that. I would say it's really important, set boundaries and also have good routines to help you decompress and wind down or like integrate into normal life at the end of your shift. It's good to keep in mind, understand that the person you're treating is the one having the emergency. You need to be compassionate, empathetic without becoming emotionally involved. And that's really hard to do. But at the end of the day, you need to be able to go home and know that you did everything for the patient and leave it at that. You should try to learn from each call and be consistent and constantly looking to improve, but don't play the what if game. If you have a patient die, or even if you have a patient that's completely fine at the end of the day and they're just really rude and obnoxious, when you're only trying to help them, you can't internalize that. You have to be able to say, tomorrow I've got to get back out there and do this again, and be able to set those boundaries in your mind. Also try not to be too cynical and make sure that you're seeking out good mentors and a healthy support system. The majority of the people that will talk to you or try to ask you about work, they're asking for a good, gruesome work story. They're not prepared to hear the answer. They may mean well, but they're not really grounded or trained to wade through some of your darker moments. Unpacking that stuff with the wrong people or in the wrong place can really kill a vibe. If you're at a party or a student event or something like that,
Yes.
And it will leave you feeling like trash. You'll feel more isolated and lonely at the end of the day. So don't be afraid to set that boundary. Don't let yourself feel pressured to answer the inevitable, what's the worst thing you've ever seen question. And that happens like anytime I tell somebody what I do for work, like it happens and people don't think about it. Don't feel pressured to do that. Know your audience and use your filter to find ways to redirect the conversation to something that's more positive, like the funniest moment, or tell a story where you know that you've made a big difference for a patient.
And also to springboard off of what Joel said about the what if game, it's inevitable. But one of the things is it's important to ask the question once, because you need to debrief the call and you need to figure out if there's anything that you can learn from it and anything that you need to grow in it, skills that you need to change, things that you need to brush up on, that kind of stuff. But at some point, you exhaust the constructive potential of it, and you need to stop, and you need to find a way to stop, because there's nothing to be gained dwelling on it. So you need to ask it once, but after that, you need to stop and move on.
A question I have now is, what are some helpful questions that people should be asking? Because I'm sure you guys have get a lot of questions, which is not a bad thing. But at the same time, what do you think would be what is a good question to get from people?
I guess one thing one of the first questions that I always come to think of is like, the first question is, how are you? Like, people want the stories, but like kind of what Stephen was saying. I mean, sometimes, where's the reality check? I always say, being in it for a very minimal amount of time, I give a lot of credit to the people that have been in it for 18 years. Like my current full-time partner, he's been doing this for 17 years. He is very salty, and he's got very straight opinions, but I give him credit. I mean, he's been in this for 17 years. That would be like the first one that comes to mind in regards to just everything, in regards to how the company operates, dealing with administration, dealing with leadership, dealing with people that call you, people that do need you, people who don't care, even family. I mean, there's been a couple where, you have to be there and try to give some solace to family in a way, and they don't like you. And it makes sense. You're giving them the worst news that they want to hear in the most emotionally driven moment for that time. They hate you. I mean, like I said, hi, my name is Roma. You can call me anything you want. I've pretty much been called everything in the book. Think about that. Like, that sounds funny, but at what point does that finally mentally and emotionally wax on you? And again, you detach that because it's an emotionally charged incident, usually when some of those things are going on, but it still affects you, right? It's still that, like Stephen said earlier, it's still the thing later you go, well, what if I would have said something different? And sometimes it's not going to matter, and it's all about how you carry yourself through those questions that makes a difference for people. So not being reactionary in that sense. So I guess that's
100%.
I think for me, I'm less fond of the ones where people are just asking about like the craziest stories or the worst stories. And like, you have a couple of stories that you just kind of pull out and you have them ready to go just because it's so common. And so like, it's not necessarily like it's a constant like emotional track every time somebody asks, because you just kind of learn to deal with it. But I really enjoy it when friends or family or people that are actually interested in coming down and seeing what we do. They'll call up and say, hey, can I stop by station sometime and actually get to see where you work and get to see the ambulance and bring their kids. That kind of stuff is a lot of fun. And it's encouraging not just to me, but to everyone, because it shows that people care. It shows that people are interested. Recruitment's also a really big deal in these types of fields. And so definitely don't want to dissuade people from considering the field, because it is a really important field and it's a really great way to help people. But that high level of interest in community support is really important, not just for me, but for everyone as a whole. And so just showing some interest in asking those types of questions and stuff. It's not necessarily like a scripted list, but just showing that you are actually invested in what the other person is saying is a really big thing.
Yeah, I would second that. Definitely find ways to ask about the job itself. Obviously, if you're going to talk about trauma or something, it's good to kind of ask, how are you? Not like, what did you go through? What was the worst moment? Mm-hmm. What's the moment that keeps you awake at night? Or like when you think about it, your heart starts beating and then it ruins your mood. I that kind of stuff does happen. I had that happen at a student event last year, and someone very well-meaning came up to me and they were like, "Oh, so you're an EMT?" And I'm not kidding. Like a minute later, asked me about that, and I was completely floored because I was still new enough. I was like, I don't have any bad moments, and then I thought about it, and I had almost lost a patient a day or two before. And my heart started beating and I was like, oh, I was in a bad mood afterwards. I think I told the person oh, it was probably somebody with a broken leg or like explosive diarrhea or something, and just kind of gave a cop-out story. But I was shook for the rest of the night. I was like in a bad mood and like avoiding people just because I was having like flashbacks and stuff. So definitely like there are ways to ask questions. And for you, if you're a provider, there are ways to tell your story that can actually be beneficial for them as members of the community or family members, but also can help you put things in perspective about like what differences are you making? Because there are a lot of calls that you run where you're just like mad afterwards. And the person, if you're the provider, finding ways to share stories that are going to engage the community and educate, but can also be beneficial to you as a provider. Not every call that you're going to run is going to be, it's going to leave you with a great sense of accomplishment. There are a lot of patients that you can actually make a difference for their life, and maybe even save their life. And they'll cuss you out, or they'll be, in a bad mood, and you just have to kind of smile and give good customer service and patient care and be like, all right, I'm glad you're doing better and wish you the best. And so finding like ways to share stories that reinforces that for you and also for the community, that like, hey, we are making a difference. And it might not be a big medical story. It might just be something like getting a patient a pillow, or, wrapping them in another blanket, and then they'll say something really profound. Or it might be dealing with a very belligerent dementia patient, and they have a moment of lucidity and say thank you, or relive something that's a really warm moment for them, and you get all the warm fuzzies, and you're like, okay, this has nothing to do with emergency medical care, but this is just like people skills, and it makes you feel alive and makes you feel like you're making a difference. So capture those moments and share those moments for people.
Yeah. And one thing that stood out to me is, well, first off, respect, because you are doing customer service while trying to save people's lives when they are most likely not in the right mind, in their worst emotional state. So that is a huge job already, right? Those of us who've worked customer service before already know. I mean, man. So like, that's such a good point out. Like, yeah, that's like above everything that you're doing medically. Yeah. Also, just like you said, it really is the human moments that make a difference, and I love that. So, not to go over all your points, but let's get into some stories. I do want to hear about some of these times where, like you guys been hinting on some of them, where you were able to grow and help people, and ways that you've also like experienced things, but also grown from it and learned and all that. Let's start with this though. How about tell me about, I mentioned the longest shift you had. Like, what gave you that longest shift? And tell me about ways that you were able to either learn from that, or rest within that, or like find ways to kind of rest within that, if at all possible.
Does sleeping while standing up count?
Yes. I mean,
was that before or after school?
Let's talk about that, especially since we talked about rest. So yeah, what's been your longest shift, and how did you guys deal with it?
I guess first question is, what are your dedicated shifts? So, I mean, we used to be running full 24s. So you work for 24 hours. And now our company redid its full scheduling system. And now we're doing a combination of 24s and 12s. So that's them trying to work to try to minimize the amount of fatigue that come on the providers. So I think my longest shift, to date that I can think of, I don't think I have done a 48. I think my longest shift that I've done is maybe a 40, but at least for sure a 36, because that's a 24 and a 12 stacked on top of each other. And most of the reason for that would be because I don't know how to say no.
Yeah.
So that's usually the problem. I've done reverse 24s. So typically a 24-hour shift, you start at like in the morning and you go to the next morning. I've done the reverse where you start at night and go to night. Don't do those. Those are the worst. Because typically you're up all day the day before. So technically you've been up for 48 hours or 12 before. I have one partner that we had a while back. Like, I don't know how he did it. But he could just sit in a chair and boom, be out like a light for 15 minutes and back up and going and just like nothing happened. I'm like, or driving back from the hospital back to our station. That's like a 15-minute ride. Boom, out like a light, sleeping for like 15 minutes and then back up again. I'm like, I don't know if he was actually sleeping or resting his eyes, as my dad always says, oh, I'm not sleeping, I'm resting my eyes. I'm very jealous. So I'm like, that would be nice. Like that you can just flip it off like a switch. Which is nice, but I don't know. I think that would really quite be the easiest way that would work. Besides that, so I don't know. That's the best I got, I guess.
What I heard is Roma doesn't remember doing a 48.
Yeah,
But
that actually might be. Yeah, I don't
did it.
remember doing the 48. I forgot the last 12 hours. Yes, that's totally fair.
Maybe you were resting your eyes already. Like at that point, you're just going on.
Although, just to be fair, in all honestness, I have fallen asleep twice driving that I remember.
Yeah, that's
It has happened.
Or
Like
taking care of patient and you like fall asleep.
that I haven't done. But the worst part was
Joel's
because we had a straight shot on one of our highways, and that's the worst because if you're straight on, you just. And that was like a site transfer or something at like 2:00 in the morning, and we had been busy all day, and so yeah. But it happens.
Yeah, my longest one was, so we were stacked 12s. I knew I wasn't going to be able to make my shift because it was a 30-minute drive, and we had an ice storm coming in, and I knew I wasn't going to be able to make it into station for my shift, and so I, being the sucker for punishment that I am, took the 12-hour shift prior to my shift and went in, did that shift, did my shift, and then couldn't get home. And so we didn't have enough of a crew to staff the following shift. And so I took the third shift after that. So it was at least 36 hours. I don't remember how much beyond 36, but it was not the most pleasant day.
Kind of out of necessity too, being like, you said like ice storm.
Yeah, I mean, you know, here in Texas, they don't know what that is, but up in Iowa, you know, it is a normal occurrence.
Yeah, Joel, you were saying.
Yeah, I would say, I think that's probably about the same for me is a 36. And it went over, at the time I would work 12-hour shifts on, and this was like when I first started last May or June, I would work 4 or 5 12-hour shifts a week, like Monday through Friday. And then I would pick up on a 911 truck on the weekends. And because I was like, I don't want to just ferry people around. Like I want to get my hands, dirty and like learn and grab some of that momentum. So I would pick up the 911 shifts. And if you're doing a 24-hour shift or even a 12-hour shift, sometimes you'll get downtime in between calls. Maybe it'll be 30 minutes between a call. Maybe it'll be a couple of hours with nothing. So those are moments where you can sleep, you can watch a movie, play video games, get something to eat, whatever. Some days you might work a 12-hour shift and literally back to back calls. You'll run 13, 14 calls in 12 hours. And it's not just running the call and treating the patient, but it's like sanitizing the ambulance afterwards, restocking it, writing your paperwork, like you're constantly working. So I think my longest shift was a 12-hour shift. I worked the night and ended up working the next day because it was short-staffed. In EMS, we have this thing called holdover. It's not very fun.
Holdover mandate is what we have.
Yeah, mandatory holdover. And so depending on whether you're a county, private EMS, city, whatever, there's either contracts or if you're like volunteer, there may not be anybody to provide coverage at all. But the idea is they don't want unstaffed 911 crews. So anytime in the city, there's going to be ambulances that are designated for 911 calls. If somebody has a heart attack, a stroke, gets shot or like wrecks their car, there has to be a truck available for them. If they're not, they may take a general transport or interfacility truck that's job is like moving discharges from ERs, or if a patient's bad off and obviously they can't go from the hospital to their other care facility or the hospital to their nursing home, ambulances have to transport them. So the type of calls that you would be dealing with on those type of trucks will be a little bit different. It's not impossible that, you might be on an interfacility truck and get a 911 call. Somebody's having a baby or somebody gets shot and they just need an ambulance. And so you can get tasked and have some variety in calls. for mandatory holdover, they want to keep people on the trucks so that there are ambulances available to take emergencies. And so if you are getting off at 8 p.m. and it is 7:57 and there is an emergency, you're not going home at 8 p.m. You're probably going home at 9 or 10 or 11:30 that night. And that's fairly common. I would be scheduled to work 48 hours and always end up working 60 hours weeks, working 4 shifts a week. And so that's fairly common practice within EMS. And my longest shift was they didn't have people available. We had a whole bunch of EMTs that were down with COVID. All of the social unrest was going on last June. So we had a bunch of our EMTs that were in the National Guard that got deployed to go deal with the protests. And so we didn't have people around. And that was a 36-hour shift that like we ran back-to-back calls. I ate like once. I didn't sleep for 36 hours. And I was like falling asleep while driving, falling asleep while taking care of the patients. At the end of that shift, the third 12-hour shift, and it was more than 36, it was like 30 something, but I don't remember. I called our dispatch to let them know I was out of service. We'd already stocked our ambulance, parked our ambulance, and the dispatcher was like, "Stand by. We're going to have to hold you over." And my partner was already in his car and he was sitting there like texting his wife and like getting his tunes going. And I ran over. I was on hold on the phone and I was like, "Man, get out of here. Go home," before they realized. And I was so like just emotionally spent. I was about ready to start crying. I was like, "I cannot do this." And I told her that my partner had already left the parking lot. And I was like, I'm not sticking around. Like we have crews to take these calls. Like there's no reason to hold us over.
And when you're talking a 12-hour shift, you're really talking a 13 or 14-hour if you've got reports to write, because there's a certain number of, like, you have to get your reports done within a certain number of hours of the call. And so if you haven't gotten all your paperwork done, you can't leave.
Yeah, Roma, you're saying?
I remember one morning we were pretty busy. I think the busiest shift that I have was with my current full-time partner back like 2 years ago. We ran a 24-hour shift. We ran about a total of 13 calls. So you're thinking, 13 calls. That's about half the time of your shift. Well, a typical call for us lasts about an hour and a half. So if you take that, and then we do what I call long distance, like interfacility, like Joel was talking about. So for us, we cover both county 911 contracts for Sheboygan County as proper. And then we also do primary interfacility transports for both of the hospitals, plus all the like little itty bitty discharges and things like that. So we ran 2 long distances. So that's 6 hours total. And so that's 9 calls. So you go 7. And so then you go 7 times an hour and a half. I'm trying to think what the numbers of that is. It's going to be what? Anybody good with numbers here? Because I'm not. A lot. Like pretty much we like ran all morning. And so I don't know if it was this shift or the other, but I remember the next morning, I think it was like a Sunday morning or something. I got in my car and I just like, what is this in the sky? Oh, that's the sun. It hurts. Like I was like so mad and grumpy. I'm like, why is that out there? Like this hurts. Like that's how sleep deprived I was. Like I hated the sun. The Lord will forgive me. But still, I was just like, why is that out there? And it's like par for the course. Like Stephen and Joel are like, yep, that sounds about right. And you're listening like, what? Why would you be so mad at that? But like, that's literally where I was at. I laugh at it. That was funny.
I mean, and respect. So, yeah. What are some instances where, more of a positive experience, something that you've been able to learn? And obviously this is part of your vacation and what you do, but what has helped you, I guess, appreciate the position and continue going as well? Any thoughts?
Appreciate the position that you've been in. I'm trying to remember. There's a quote that reminds me of. There's a quote that they say, it's something within the Japanese culture about how they really focus in on bringing people into the world and then protecting their elderly and escorting them outside of the natural world. And what a sense of honor that is to people. And that said, now think about it. EMS, they're pretty much in the same boat. There are people that bring people into the world, and there have been people that will escort people out of the natural world. I mean, personally for me, most rewarding ones are the hospice transfers. They're the most bummer ones because these people know that this is pretty much their last ride. Actually, yesterday we took a gentleman from his home and we stopped at the local gas station and he got a smoothie and a pack of smokes. And the people there knew him. And it was beautiful. It was a bummer. Almost everybody was crying because it's like they know him and they know that this is it, And I actually got the opportunity, approximately 4 years ago, I got to take my grandma to hospice. And that was so rewarding. We actually came out here by my parents' house and we took the cot and brought it up on the beach and we just sat there for 10 minutes and just looked at the lake. And that's the beauty of that. Like, we're able to do that. But yet it's such an emotionally charged call, but it's so rewarding. And so I think taking those times to identify and not accept, but acknowledge humanity in the time that it is, I think is one that I think takes time. And I think sometimes you have to be careful that you don't just, like I think Stephen said, don't become cynical with it, because we're all human. We all come to that place. And so providing the best care, best PR, but even just the best emotional human connection that you can for those people, because they know that it's the last time. If you talk to Joel and Steve and myself, I think there's a lot of places. We could go on for hours of places that we've learned, but for me, that's probably my biggest one.
100%. Yes. Yeah. Stephen, Joel, what do you guys think?
There's a lot of calls where you're actually able to affect some sort of change. There's a lot of calls where you can't. Sometimes the best you can do is just calm somebody down and just have a conversation, get to hear about their family, get to hear about, whatever is going on in their life. And those can be difficult because we like to be doing things with our hands and we like to be able to actually make things happen. But some of the most rewarding calls, I think, for me were like, and we didn't do a lot of transfers. We were mostly 911. But when we were taking like cancer patients to their treatment center for complications or something like that, but you're able to hear their stories and you're able to hear the things that they've been learning. And the community that I was working in, pretty much everyone knows each other. You can always find somebody in common, pretty much. That was always fun. There were also calls where we were supporting fellow EMS providers or police officers or firefighters. One of the things that maybe people don't realize that we do is when there's something like a house fire, we'll go out with, even if there's no injuries, just to kind of stage and help. But one of the things that we're doing there is checking all the firefighters out after they've spent so many minutes inside. And so we're getting to support these other people that are doing incredible work for the community as well. And getting to be a part of, getting to be a gear in that whole big machine of everything that's going on in this community and helping this community. And I think those are really, really rewarding calls, aside from like the individual incidents and things that we run into.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Just being there for the families, being there for other coworkers. One of the things I love to do with, like, whenever we're transporting a dementia patient is I'll find something to connect through, like, their youth, especially if they're completely out of it or they're like, they're acting like a 2 or 3 year old. I've found that like music is something that is a pretty universal like way of connecting with people. And so I'll kind of guesstimate, okay, this person's in their 80s. Like, I'm going to play some swing music, or I'm going to find some Bing Crosby tunes or Fats Domino or something like that. And it always brings them back to like ground level and like can kind of center them. When we get to the hospital, they'll be more or less like, calm down. And, if they're agitated or something, and it's a really nice way of just like sharing a moment. Sometimes I have to be careful because like there's always wild cards. Like one time I had a lady and I asked her what she wanted to listen to. And she was like in her 80s and she like very enthusiastically and profanely told me, she's like, I want to listen to AC/DC. And I was like, what? You're like 84 years old and you want to listen to AC/DC? And she's like, yeah, Angus is my man. He's like so hot. And I was like, what the heck? And so it's like, you want to listen to Angus? She's like, yeah, he's like Australian or Scottish. I can't remember. And I was like, what do you want to listen to? She's like, Back in Black. And so I pulled up Spotify and like I blasted AC/DC's Back in Black. And I'm not kidding. Like she's sitting there on the stretcher and she's like bobbing her head and it's like, dun, dun, dun. And I was like, what in the world is happening here? And I told her, I was like, when we get into the nursing facility, like the nurses have absolutely no sense of humor. They're not going to understand. So I'm going to have to turn the music down. Like when we're talking to the nurses on the radio or like when we get in, I'm going to have to kill it. But I promise you, we'll rock out for the rest of the ambulance ride. And so that was just kind of a funny moment where like we bonded over music.
That's so cool. Yeah. And so with that, again, it's just really cool to see, again, like you guys pointed out, that it is all these human moments, right? There's a lot of the craziness and whatnot, but a lot of times what brings us back is how we can connect as humans and as people. So on that note, as we close out, I'm sure there will be some listeners, some younger people who are considering going into the EMT or the EMT field, doing this, becoming EMS. What would you say to them? Just could be a short sentence or something, but a piece of advice that you would leave with people thinking about this. We'll start with Steven, Roma, and then we'll end with Joel. How's that?
I think it's going to have to be a little bit longer than just a short sentence. But
go for it.
Definitely find a support system and people that you can trust. Live out your faith however you can in the field and with whoever God gives you in your rig. Don't minimize the importance of the really small details in your medical procedures. Pay very, very close attention to those. They're very important.
I think one of the biggest things is this is kind of a shameless plug through Navigate, for the new Navigate. But I think one of the things I saw when I did it back in the day is I saw that when I started looking through that things, EMS was one of the ways I could fulfill my passions, my goal, and what I thought my mission was and what God was leading me to. Initially, I thought it was just a stepping stone, but I feel like kind of right now it's my primary place to be for the time and point. Yeah, definitely, as Steven says, live out your faith, and that can be a really hard thing to do, especially in the EMS field as a whole. Right now, in the current theater of things that are going on, because you don't work for a company, you work, in some cases you work for a leadership structure, and sometimes you don't agree with that leadership structure. So be the leader that God has called you to be in those positions, and that will be rewarding. It won't be easy, but it will be rewarding. And even just the anecdote of, it's okay if you feel like it doesn't work. That's fine. I mean, thankfully in the medical side, there's a lot of different options. I've seen multiple good friends that started EMS and just thought, that's not what I want, but they found something else and they're really good at it. And so don't be afraid of that either. Kind of use it as a stepping stone to figure out where God is calling you to be. And don't get your feet too wet. I mean, get them wet, but don't drown, I guess.
Yeah, I'm going to steal that. Get your feet wet, but don't drown. That's a good word.
So, Abraham, one of the things,
yes,
I think my craziest call, we actually had a deer blow through the hospital window.
What? Ooh, that sounds fun.
Run around the lobby and then blow out another hospital window on the way out.
Yo, okay, yeah. Tell this story. I remember you mentioning it. Yeah, let's hear this story. Go for it.
So I was in the ER, and this is my training hospital, and it's where the ambulances are based out of for this region. And dispatch grabs us and says, "Hey, just as a heads up, police are coming out to the hospital, and we're not exactly sure why yet." So we get on our stuff and we run down to the other end of the hospital. And turns out a deer had, this is in winter, a deer had blown out a window, run around the lobby, and then blown out another window on the way out. So there's deer blood everywhere, all over that entire room. And so we go to look around, and The poor old lady that was a receptionist in that lobby was hiding under her desk at the front of the room.
Steven, I did want to ask. So, you got the call. It was when you got there. The deer was the deer still there?
No, so the deer disappeared and we never found it. Law enforcement never found it.
Oh,
but
really?
We did find out that hospital security had gotten there while the deer was still in the room, and they had pulled their tasers out, just about tased it. I have no idea what happens if you tase a deer. We just about found out.
If you're gonna go into your story, go for it.
I don't know. I definitely would agree, like, seconding Roma's psych transfers. I've had some really weird 2 a.m. psych encounters. Probably the stickiest or sketchiest situation, I would just say, like, the whole week of all the protests that were happening last year, that was pretty sketchy. Going out to calls and just never knowing, like, what was happening. Thankfully, like, we stayed safe, but I know, like, there were other departments in our state that were getting, like, rocks thrown at them when they would go out to calls. Like firefighters trying to go out and put out fires from the, like, riots, and having people, threaten them and stuff. We had protesters that, like, tried to jump in front of our ambulance while we were coming back from our call. That was kind of sketchy. I think one of the nights we were working a 24-hour shift, we had to come up with a plan for, like, what we were going to do, because that particular station we were at was our ambulance bus barn and, like, auto shop. So there's, like, a large collection of oxygen bottles and gasoline and all the flammable stuff. And so we're like, what are we going to do if, like, they come over here and a fire gets started? Like, we're all probably going to die. And so we had to come up with this whole, like, egress plan for how we were going to evacuate and, like, get away if our building got torched. That was pretty scary. And thankfully, God protected us and people significantly chilled out. We did take a call to one of the protesters that had OD'd, like, the next morning, and
Wow,
it was just, like, lying in the street.
Mm-hmm.
And when we showed up, police showed up, and anytime somebody's, like, a man down, like whether they're shot or OD'd or something like that, usually police will get there first to, like, secure the scene. And so everyone was the locals were kind of agitated to begin with when they go out there and they see a whole bunch of cop cars and they see, like, an ambulance, and they're like, what are you doing to this poor guy? And that was kind of a scary situation too, to just go out there and, we're trying to talk to the patient, and having a crowd of agitated people, like, yelling at you and, like, what are you doing? But thankfully, that was pretty chill. We were safe. We were able to take care of the patient and get him to the hospital and stuff, and nobody got hurt out of that. But yeah, those were some sketchy times.
Yeah, I can't imagine. Well, definitely scary. Yeah, you want to go ahead into what you're going to say with closing thoughts, but yeah, go for it.
Yeah, so for people that are preparing for the field, know that it's a huge field. There's a lot of different things that you can be doing, like what Roma said. Literally getting your national registry, getting on the ambulance is just like dipping your little toe into the ocean of medical, first responder, law enforcement. There's so many different things you can do. Decide what you're wanting to get out of the field. Doing that's going to help you set work boundaries. It's going to help you to seek out mentors that'll help keep you on track. It can open up a lot of doors, but it can also become a dead-end job if you let it. If you're going to be a career EMT, it's physically and psychologically demanding, and doing it long-term takes a huge toll. I know personally, like 3 coworkers that have killed themselves in the past, like, year and a half. I know of multiple that are, younger people in their 20s and 30s that are now on disability because of work-related injuries. You need to take care of yourself and always keep your eyes on the horizon. If you like the ambulance and want to stay in that environment full time, become an AEMT, become a paramedic, start teaching classes, or become a fire medic. If you like paramedicine, you can get into critical care transports, become a flight medic. If you like the law enforcement or the outdoors, there are options to work with SWAT teams, or you could serve as an EMT with the Forestry Service. If you like the hospital environment, you could work in an ER as a paramedic or EMT. I've done a little bit of that myself. there's also like paramedic to nursing bridge programs. Whatever you do, don't become the cynical 45-year-old EMT basic who hates their life, doesn't take care of their body, and then dies like 2 years after retiring from living a lifetime of stress and sleep deprivation. Like, take care of yourself.
Yeah, that's a really good word. Not just for EMT, I would argue, but especially hearing from you guys. Well, guys, this was very educational for myself, and I'm sure for a lot of our listeners. Thank you so much for sharing your stories. Thank you for your service with serving your communities and just going around, especially like last year. I know a lot of you guys were just working a lot with helping with everything. So really appreciate it for myself, but just with all the stories and all the different things that we talked about that you guys went through, that's fascinating, but something that, hey, I really appreciate. So thank you for coming on. This has been really good.
Thanks, Abe.
All right. Well, that was a really cool episode to listen to. Abe, what were some of your takeaways?
I think just the spirit of service and being human, getting to talk with the brothers here. Again, hearing a lot of their stories on that episode, and here on the episode, just to see how, yes, of course, with everything we do, it is about serving the community to the best of our abilities, but also with being an EMT specifically, how human it is. And it's not just about medical knowledge, right? It's and as Roma and others mentioned, it's not the book smarts, but it is about learning on the go and all these other things that you only learn when you're on the job. Like, and as we say, like project-based learning, it's when you are out there doing stuff. That's where you, one, really get the experience, but two, are truly growing. And I think that's really cool.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And yeah, for real, like the amount of work that those guys were talking about, how they put in so much time just in the shifts and in preparing for being able to do that is absolutely incredible. And one thing that Roma mentioned that he really appreciated when he was in Unbound is our Navigate course. And if you don't know what that is that Navigate is a 16-week online course that we here at Unbound offer that teaches students a model for a stress-free, God-honoring decision-making framework, along with other principles that equip them to make better decisions throughout their life, something which I think all of those guys have really been able to use in their day-to-day. And so if you're interested in that, you can get a free 4-part video series about decision-making sent straight to your inbox by signing up at beunbound.us/navigate if you want to learn more.
Yep, I cannot second that more. For all of you guys listening, thank you so much for tuning in. This has been a really great and fun episode to record. Next time, episode 62 is Unbound Conversations. We have a set of very exciting guests coming out. I know I say this a lot, but seriously, you guys do not want to miss this one. It's coming out next week as usual. Stay tuned, be unbound, and I'll catch you all next week.